Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here with you.
No, I'm glad. I'm glad you can talk with us and send a message to the people inside Cuba and also to the community here in Miami, to our exiles, who are very confused about the election issue, with all the fake news going both for and against both sides. How do you see what's happening, Senator?
Well, first, regarding the issue of Cuba, and it's important to talk about this because I think that inside Cuba, obviously, there's a constant bombardment from the regime talking about us. Look, my wish has always been the following: to put things in the hands of the people inside Cuba. Not people in Washington or anywhere else in the world, but the people inside Cuba, their own destiny. And that's why President Trump, at our suggestion, simply made the following change. If you're a company controlled by the Cuban military, like ASA, which controls all the hotels and all the big companies that make all the money in Cuba, then you can't do business with the United States. If you're someone independent, then you can. And it's the Cuban government that has decided not to allow that. In the end, they obviously don't want to allow it because economic independence brings political independence, and that's what they want to control. In other words, they can tell the people, okay, fine, but if you step out of line, I'll shut down your business or take away the little you have, and so on. So that's what we want. So the Cuban people can decide what kind of government, what kind of economic model they want to have. That has always been our interest, and it always will be. We're always looking for ways that we can support that and try to make it happen. I'm really glad to see that Cuban youth are waking up again, that they're understanding, in my opinion, more and more every day, that a big part of the suffering and lack of opportunity that exists is the fault of a regime that controls every aspect of life in Cuba. But that could change as soon as tomorrow. It's the regime that doesn't allow it.
The dictatorship is always trying to twist the intentions that come from the United States, whether it's from the exile community or from you all, the politicians who represent us, who push for things in Washington and also at the state level. They say we want annexation, that we want to annex Cuba to the United States, that we want to kill the Cuban people, that all the misery the Cuban people suffer is our responsibility and the responsibility of the embargo. Senator, could you briefly explain, of course, because it can't be explained in depth, what the embargo is and how it really affects Cubans on the island?
Well, right now it's very simple. That is, if you're not a company controlled by the regime, in other words, a company controlled by GAESA, for example, which is basically run by the military, or in some cases, they've just taken off their military uniforms and put on an Italian suit. But in the end, it's the same people involved in all of this. And what they want is to maintain economic control so they can keep their political control, to hold on to power. I tell people the following: Cuba can do business with Canada, with England, with all of Europe, with Japan, with Korea. So why isn't Cuba full of investments and full of Japanese cars? Why isn't Cuba full of all kinds of things? There are tourists who go and visit a place, they're taken to a place.
Yeah.
They take them back to the airport and leave. But why isn't there all this economic activity with all these other countries? For the simple reason that the regime doesn't allow it. The regime doesn't want Cubans, for example, to be able to own their own businesses. I don't understand why, because when Cubans get to Miami, within a year they've started a business and they're doing really well. Cubans have the ability everywhere in the world. Wherever Cubans go in the world, they've done it. They move forward, push ahead, and bring incredible ideas.
The chicken.
Except for Cuba.
The chicken they buy in the United States. Then they distribute it to the people, they sell it to the people, and they say it's from the United States. They're not starving us to death. Is the hunger that the Cuban people are suffering caused by the United States, Senator? Or is it the result of the mediocrity of the Cuban system?
Well, first of all, Cuba is a country with enormous productive capacity, but it's just not doing it. Cuba is a country that, for the most part, could feed all its people with its own land, and there have been times when it did. Even today, look at the remittances people send home. The Cuban government takes a large percentage of that for themselves when they convert it to Cuban currency and pocket it. They collected the dollars, and that's another thing that had to stop. Now, in the end, all of that is a consequence of decisions they've made, because the Cuban regime doesn't want the Cuban people to have economic independence. That is, they don't want a Cuban to be able to say, I don't care what the government says because I make my own living, I have my own money, my own business. They want to be able to have that control. And if you don't believe it, just think about the people who are doing really well, for example, with a private rental house. And when things were going really well for them, they came down on them because they were making too much money. They would take away their license. They would take it away and they would deny it to them. And also favoritism, right? They would take away one person's license to give it to someone else who was more patriotic, more revolutionary, and all that. In short, they want to control that because they know that if they can control it, people won't stray from the political line that's demanded of them. And it's an enormous suffering. But I ask you to look at the example of the Cuban who goes abroad and how they're achieving abroad what they can't achieve in their own homeland. That's very sad. That has to change.
That's how it is, because we also have the possibility to turn Cuba into what it always was, a prosperous, wonderful country, before the communist curse arrived, before this terrible cancer fell upon it. During the Trump administration, we've seen that the restrictive measures have worked. We've seen a dictatorship that's more and more on its last legs. A dictatorship that's down for the count, as we've described it on this show, and we can't let it get back up. Taking it to boxing terms, right? What would happen with a Democratic administration? Is there a real danger that the opposition inside Cuba could be directly affected by the Democrats' weakness?
I don't think there's any doubt that's what's going to happen. In short, I think that's exactly what they plan to do. Look, right here on my own desk, I was just looking at it. This is a project from the Center for Democracy in the Americas at the Washington office on Latin America. This is basically the plan that Biden is going to follow. And it's all about talking about removing and changing everything that was done. Anything that has Trump's name on it, they're going to change, even if it's a good idea. That's ridiculous. The media also plays right in with that. The other day, I saw an article here saying that now technology is opening up in Cuba. There were never any sanctions here against technology. The only sanction against technology coming into Cuba was from the regime, which doesn't want to allow it. I wish that tomorrow I could say, look, open internet for everyone. That would be fantastic. They won't allow it. They don't want Cubans to be able to communicate with other Cubans or to be able to read foreign press. They can read whatever they want, but the regime doesn't want them to do it.
How can we, as exiles, Senator, prevent a Democratic administration from going over our heads once again, like the Obama administration did, which carried out negotiations that are still confidential today? We've asked for them to be declassified, at least so we can have an idea of how those negotiations were conducted. How can we defend ourselves as exiles from what seems to be this Democratic administration that is once again looking to open up to the Cuban dictatorship? All the benefits that will not be reflected at all on the island, for Cubans, for everyday Cubans.
Well, I think, first of all, they've already done it. I mean, the historic vote that President Trump received in South Florida, which shows that programs like yours and people like you played such a big role in that. They are going to respect that. That has to be respected. I think, to a certain extent, that's going to hold them back. Because remember, for many years, I was getting messages from certain individuals in our community who said that the future of Cuba, that the new Cubans who had just arrived, that they weren't into that they wanted a total opening and all that. I think with all of this, they've had to reconsider all of that. It starts with that. Second, on my part, we have the role here of appointing certain people and opposing the appointment of individuals who are, in the end, going to have to follow the party line. But
that is exactly what we wanted to hear from you today, Senator, and we truly appreciate it.
And third is to punish them, because here there are elections every 2 years. There will come a time when the congressman, the senator, the presidential candidate who hasn't behaved a certain way or who has expressed themselves in a certain way, you have to punish him at the ballot box, just like was already done here in 2 congressional seats. And there are opportunities to do more of that. So we have to carry that out at every stage. The individual voter.